Welcome back. Thursday, March 25th, 2021. Okay. I watched the press conference with President Biden, and it reminded me of a few things I've said in the past. We just go along with what we call or may call fictions. They may have, indeed most do have, important implications and prescriptions, but we just go along with them, don't we? The idea that a president uses a briefing book in his first press conference after over 2 months, and it's normal or okay, is one fiction. The idea we have an in-command commander-in-chief, a president in command of his faculties, that's another fiction. The most important cultural issue, or second most, depending, in this country right now and since last year, has been the issue of race, and primarily America as a fundamentally or institutionally racist society. People weren't paying too much attention in 2016 when Hillary Clinton said we all suffered from implicit bias, but that was a real dog whistle. We were told Donald Trump spoke in dog whistles, saying things in code, or receive a wink and a nod from race haters, and we go along with that charge too, even as we're told Donald Trump is too explicit and brutish in his language. So we just go along with two contradictions, because if one won't work as a condemnation, the other just may. But what Hillary said about implicit bias was the true dog whistle to an academic and intellectual elite that believes America is systemically racist. And that's the odd thing about implicit bias, whether we're told we suffer from it, all of us, from an older white lady, or whether we're told we suffer from it from a younger white lady like Robin DiAngelo, the best-selling author of the book White Fragility. That's the funny thing about this whole thing. We just all kind of go along with this. We're told we all suffer from it, mostly by white people, and yet invest hopes and dreams, as in Clinton, or money and intellectual time, as in DiAngelo and her organizations, listening to them and taking them seriously, as if they have been able to supersede and overcome their implicit biases to lecture us in order to lecture us on ours. In case it was unclear, Robin DiAngelo is white. We get to do this, watch white people say every other white person is racist, as if the first person to say it, back to an 11-year-old child's game, I guess, is immune from it. Kind of like calling shotgun in a car ride or jinx in a childish contest of words. To put it clearly, I, white person, should be listened to as I am recognizing all white people are racist, whether they know it or not, admit it or not, and I should be listened to about this to help you understand how you are racist too, whether you know it or not. Funny thing about that, most racists don't try to expose and prove the odiousness of their racial or racist beliefs. They usually try to defend them. But when we are all racist by dint of our color as white, somehow we all just go along and take seriously the white people who say this, especially white women, telling us we are all racists and need to deal with it, apologize for it, compensate for it. The other funny thing about it, if you admit your own guilt, what do you have to teach me or instruct me on other than your own story? You have no credibility to lecture or instruct me on mine, right? The idea of indicting someone for your own guilt or errancy is just another funny thing about modern society we all just kind of go along with. It's another myth. You admitting you're racist makes me want to listen to you about racism? It used to be called disqualification. I mean, how many criminal convicts are allowed to be prosecutors, much less even become members of the legal bar? Do arsonists get to join fire departments? Do traitors get to become members of our military? Do drunk drivers get to be truckers or chauffeurs or even keep their licenses to drive? I'm reminded of the Ralph Waldo Emerson line, the louder he spoke of his honor, the faster we counted our spoons. It all reminds me of the pseudo-sophisticated intellectual infancy or conceit from the academy in the 1980s and 1990s. Alan Bloom got to it well in his book, The Closing of the American Mind, where he wrote this, quote, There was one thing a professor can be absolutely certain of. Almost every student entering the university believes, or says he believes, that truth is relative. If this belief is put to the test, one can count on the student's reaction. They will be uncomprehending. That anyone should regard the proposition as not self-evident astonishes them, as though they were calling into question 2 + 2 = 4. These are things you don't think about. The students' backgrounds are as various as America can provide. Some are religious, some atheists, some are to the left, some to the right. Some intend to be scientists, some humanists or professionals or businessmen. Some are poor, some are rich. They are unified only in their relativism and in their allegiance to equality. And the two are related in moral intention. The relativity of truth is not a theoretical insight, but a moral postulate, the condition of a free society, or so they see it. They have all been equipped with this framework early on, and it is the modern replacement for the inalienable natural rights that used to be the traditional American grounds for a free society, close quote. And of course, the funny thing we all just went along with was when someone could say there was no such thing as absolute truth. If you question them on this, they did not understand they themselves were admitting, they themselves were postulating an absolute truth. Judgment. Saul gave birth to another piece of nonsense we all just kind of went along with. That one should not be judgmental, not about lifestyle choices, not about other cultures, not about other countries, not about other people. And yet we knew deep down that this too was a myth or a conceit. For people made rational judgments every single day in forming contracts and deciding on partnerships, legal or familial, in deciding court cases, criminal or civil. So deep down was it a ruse that today there are no more judgmental people than those who used to cast the pitch to us not to be judgmental. The liberals and the left, they judge us all the time about whether we are racist, about what we think, about what motivates our thinking, about our intelligence levels. They judge us all the time. Which brings us to one other noun that has lost its favor, if not currency, and that's hypocrisy. It used to be a hell of a negative indictment of someone or something. It had nearly the same potency, nearly, as calling someone a bigot. One thinks about its potency in the 1980s, for example, where some preachers of moralism in the name of God were found to have been engaged in something awfully close to prostitution, but certainly the violation of the commandment against adultery. And I'm thinking of your Jimmy Bakkers and your Jimmy Swaggarts. The hypocrisy we took so seriously that we even indiscriminately denounced and distrusted the real things, those in their business who never went down those roads. Hypocrisy was such a potent charge, once we used to think of it as the respect or homage vice paid to virtue, and that it hurt everybody. Today, when we call a political leader, say Barack Obama, when we call him out for condemning racism, while trafficking with Louis Farrakhan, or condemning the filibuster in racial terms, though he supported it when it was suitable to him, when we call a leader like that a hypocrite, it means nearly nothing. Not anymore. It's almost as if we wished there were a better word now. But this is all what happens when you defy common sense, go along with things you know are simply not true, live in myths because of the conceit of the pseudo-intellectual age, where you either have forgotten the natural right arguments or you want to be considered part of the in or cool crowd. This is why it was so meaningful to so many when Donald Trump said political correctness was the biggest problem this country had. Remember when he said that? 2015, the very first Republican debate. For he shouted resonantly enough for those who labored and lived under these societal fictions and jokes that the emperor had no clothes. That's what he was saying. The first political candidate on a major stage to do so. But in all our nodding at all this, if you agree with my analysis above, let's never forget something about that famous story. Really, two things. When Hans Christian Andersen wrote it, recall how it came about for the emperor. He was suckered by two swindlers, and so were the people in the street who thought they had to just go along with the bad joke these swindlers perpetrated on a gullible leader, saying and shouting as they did how magnificent these new clothes were. Everyone in the streets and the windows said, "Oh, how fine are the emperor's new clothes. Don't they fit him to perfection? And see his long train." Nobody would confess that he couldn't see anything, for that would prove him either unfit for his position or a fool. No costume the emperor had worn before was ever such a complete success. "But he hasn't got anything on," said a little child. "Did you ever hear such innocent prattle?" said his father. And one person whispered to another what the child had said. "He hasn't anything on. A child says he hasn't anything on." "But he hasn't got anything on," the whole town started to cry out at last. The emperor shivered, for he suspected they were right. But he thought, "This procession has got to go on." So he walked more proudly than ever, as his noblemen held high the train that wasn't there at all. Nobody would confess the truth, for they didn't want to be seen as a fool. Today one might say racist or idiot, or as the Democrats try to foist on us as a pejorative term, conservative. But finally a truth teller appeared, a child, because children know when they are being swindled in a way we sophisticated adults convince ourselves against, especially if someone with a PhD or in high political office says something. And so I fear where we are today, too many holding high a train they truly know isn't there at all in our culture and our politics, going through exquisite practices and policies of meaningless exactitude. I plead, don't fall for it. Don't give in to it. We don't all have to just kind of go along with it. We really don't. Living in and with myths is no different from living in or with a lie. The only thing odd right now to me is so many go along with such big lies. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.